I think for me, there was never really a decision about diving or not. I mean, I've been intrigued and fascinated by the water really since a very young age. Actually, my mother had me in swim lessons before I could walk, so I was actually able to swim prior to being able to take my first steps. She would play with me with poker chips in the water, to get me underwater playing at a young age. So I swam and was passionate about the water from a very young age. I swam throughout really most of my life. I was an active swimmer. And so when I sort of noticed scuba diving, that was just a natural extension of the swimming and free diving and fun that I was already having. It just allowed me to extend that experience. It actually happened when I was in high school, so I guess I was about 15 at the time. And my father and I took a scuba class, and it really took to it like a fish in water. And so I enjoyed the experience quite a lot. It was a very exciting opportunity. I grew up in South Florida, so there's good access to the ocean, a lot of diving down there, nice coral reefs to explore, later wrecks throughout the region as well. So I think it was somewhat of a given. It was just a matter of time. I think becoming more interested in aggressive forms of diving is probably a bit part of my psychology, so I'm always curious about investing myself more heavily in anything that I pursue. So I get very curious immediately about the extremes of any kind of activities. But the sort of practical hands-on aspect to the technical diving really occurred when I was in college. And I was back in college, curious about the area, got involved with the scuba program there, started to teach diving as a way to pay for college, but swimming around in the local springs gets boring after a couple trips around a small basin. So I noticed these pretty intriguing dark holes that were in the bottom of those basins. And really my first peek in the cave, I think, was more or less done. I had to see around each corner progressively. I think it really fit well with my psychology, which was in general in life, what's around the next corner of life. And here in caves is a very realistic sort of practical emphasis in that region. So I got quite excited about it very early. I would say that they were pretty similar time periods. So I can't say precisely, but probably I was doing a little bit more cave diving before deep diving. This was the time when a lot of that training was present and available, but not as well developed and emphasized as it is today. So a lot of the earliest exposures were sort of a little trial error, a little bit of a friend had done something, and so we would get together. And especially if you lived in an area like northern Florida, where the access to caves was really very easy. As a college student with very limited money, that was actually a great place to dive because you had no boat fees, and everything was very inexpensive once you owned your own equipment. So we began experimenting with short dives into the cave systems, and right about that same time I got intrigued by all the different forms of diving beyond the level that I thought I understood. You get up to the point where you're teaching diving, and so you imagine that you have some kind of expertise. And then as I started cave diving and technical diving, I realized I knew very little actually about scuba diving, which I found very intriguing. Well, I think diving works well because it sort of triangulates a number of my passions. One, in general, with life, I have a bit of an insatiable curiosity. So something like Google has been a real revelation for me because if I find out about something, I can very quickly be off on multiple tangents, just exploring different aspects of any particular area. And so diving is neat because it really helps fulfill a number of areas. It's active and can be particularly active depending on the kind of diving that you do. So I enjoy physical activity, and that's exciting. It involves the water. As I mentioned, I have a natural affinity for the water. I really love to be in, on, around water, and so it fulfills that aspect. And then it can be more or less technical depending on your level of interest. So it can involve fairly sophisticated types of equipment or lots of different pieces of equipment, and allows you to really explore your own limits as well as the environmental limits of the area. So I think it intersects well. And then finally, it fulfills this odd part of my psychology that I don't know that I understand, but I like to be in really desolate places. So let's say far removed on a mountain top or in the middle of a desert. Being very far back in a cave is quite desolate because you suddenly realize that there's really nothing around, nothing has ever been there before, and you're really quite removed from other individuals or other activity. Well, I don't know that I take that for granted. I try to be a good educator. I find it interesting, and I find it another set of challenges. So I think I learn as much from my students as I teach them, maybe more. As I really started to learn that being able to do something and being able to teach it are very different animals. Neither necessarily harder or easier, but just very different. Sort of aspect, and it challenges you to understand a topic in a very different way when you have to try to teach it. Sometimes I find it more difficult to teach than to do, and sometimes I find myself sitting there thinking over and over again how I do something so that I can figure out how it is that I should teach it. So I don't take it for granted that I'm good at it, but I'm interested in it and I'm passionate about it, and I enjoy sharing my sort of magical experience with particular activities. And I try to help bestow some of that on the people that I share those experiences with. So if I am good at it at all, and I leave that to my students to evaluate, then it would be just because of the passion I feel for the particular thing that I'm pursuing and my desire to share that passion with another human being, and hopefully their ability to resonate along similar lines and see something of merit in it that they also enjoy. I think that one of the main reasons is that nobody else would do it. Maybe everybody said it's a good idea, but it looks like a lot of work, and you're stupid enough to take on a challenge. Really, the founding of GUE has a lot of tangential history. One of its main original precepts was that it was going to really be very oriented around conservation and exploration as primary aspects, and the training was going to be principally a sort of retraining or development component. And so really the organization, as we originally envisioned it, was very much organized around accomplishing the desire to build local communities that had a high degree of capacity to explore and conserve those aquatic environments. It quickly became obvious to us that retraining people was a lot more work and less efficient and less effective than it would be to start from the beginning. And so a lot of the procedures and systems and structure and equipment that we were designing and building and conceiving of really was more natural to just take all those and roll them into an educational component to the organization as well, which took a bit of a life of its own. So maybe I became in some sense an unwilling educator at first, and then my students taught me what a neat experience it could be. And that's again why I say maybe they teach me more than I teach them, because originally I was really trying to build systems that would let us accomplish what we wanted to accomplish. And originally I knew those tools to be good equipment and good capacity and a good standardized approach so that disparate individuals from around the world could work efficiently together. Later I came to realize, well, very soon after that, I came to realize that whole educational infrastructure was also going to be another of the very important tools needed to accomplish our goals. Yeah, I think actually you hit on maybe in some ways even the more important words, because underwater is one of the areas we're most passionate about, but I think at heart most people who are really explorers are life explorers, I don't think that they prefer to confine themselves to one particular discipline. Unfortunately, to be really an explorer, particularly in this day and age, you probably have to confine yourself somewhat because it's fairly hard to explore, space and land and sea simultaneously. Maybe in the early days that was more practical. But we from the very beginning it was very globally oriented. So some of the earliest discussions actually about the formal structure of GUE occurred with my good friend and co-founder, our vice president, Todd Kincaid. And we were on one of our projects in the early 1990s in Turkey. And we were actually sitting up in the mountains following a series of dives that we did. It was actually part of the work we did for his dissertation. And we began talking about, the Karst Institute or that we threw around different kinds of things. But it was always immediately a given that the activity that we pursued would be more at the further reaches, exploration and nature, because that was a passion of ours, but that it would also be globally based, that the kind of work we had done in Florida was only the beginning of the kind of stuff that we wanted to do throughout our lifetime, and really the kind of stuff that we wanted to help others and enable them to do throughout years to come. Yeah, obviously several of those aspects are really hard to gauge, especially for the subjective component, which is me. I think that in general, I think it requires that you are maybe even almost unhealthy in your curiosity, because most people would sensibly stop when things get uncomfortable or difficult or expensive or troublesome or where they take too much time or energy or effort. And so an explorer has to immediately ignore all of those things. I mean, if you're curious about something and you go, well, I wonder what's at that place, or what does it look like there, or what's around this corner, and you begin to assemble on a sense of what it would take to go look at that thing. If it's real exploration, it's almost and certainly antithetical to all sensibility to go look at that thing. And the more real the exploration, the more antithetical to any rational thought it becomes. So, if it's fairly easy to get to and requires fairly limited resources, it's probably already been seen by someone, especially nowadays. So I think that right away you have to have this sort of irrational component to your personality that is complementary to your curiosity, but supersedes your rationality. But then you also need to be rational enough to be able to assemble everything necessary to accomplish that goal. So you have to have, I think, a little bit of a odd mix of traits in that regard. And then the risk component, I think, depends a lot really on the thing that you want to go see. So sometimes it might be just resource intensive. There's always going to be some level of risk. I mean, just walking outside our house, we have some risk. And I think that's probably the hardest for me to answer, but one of the ones that's been most intriguing to me through my life, because I can't gain a good objective sense of the aspect or the components of risk, because people view them so differently. Some people think immediately upon doing something, I find from people that are like, oh, that's really scary or very risky, and I don't feel that it is at all. So maybe my risk aversion relationship is pretty different. But then of course I see other people do sometimes things that I'm like, wow, that's that's pretty hardcore, and they also they struggle with that. And one of the several episodes in my life that's kind of become pretty interesting. I worked on a pretty film, sort of B-roll, G.I. Jane film with Demi Moore in it. I worked in the backstop in a scuba-related component as support for that film. A friend of mine was into that, so I worked on a couple movies with them, as much for entertainment as anything else. And I was talking to, there were several guys who were sort of expert in supporting the film from SEAL Team 6 there. And so we got into this conversation, and my friend told them what I did, and so we start talking, and these guys are all going, that is so crazy. that's so dangerous, and you know, they were just blown away. You know, they were just, for them, that was the height of insanity. You know, and of course, you know, I think that's probably not lost on the average person, that, you know, these people are trained to go in very small groups into very hostile terrain, sometimes, you know, with the intention to kill or rescue people in impossible circumstances, who suddenly, you know, were looking at the thing that I did and considering it to be hopelessly dangerous. And I've run into quite a few other people in my travels where that might be kind of similar, you know, where anything from, you know, a jet fighter pilot to, you know, a SEAL team member might think it's crazy. So I can't answer that question. I think I'm less risk averse than the average person, but I think there are also people out there that are even less so than me. I have a somewhat romantic view of life, constrained a little bit on a rational basis, but yeah, I do find it romantic in a number of different ways. So for me, exploration at its heart is the most significant form of spirituality that I feel. So when I am in the middle of nowhere, I feel closest to sort of raw nature. You know, I feel most plugged into the universe when I stop in the middle of a place someone's never before seen, witnessing, you know, just dramatic, beautiful landscapes, and I think about it. And nowadays I really do that. In the early years I didn't take the time because I was so worried about doing it well. But nowadays, that's the thing I like most about aging, is sometimes you can really appreciate certain aspects of your life better. And one of these is that I really stop every now and then and I look around and I really try to just absorb the raw energy that I feel in the environment in which I am. And I think about you know, the sort of time scales, tens of millions of years in historical creation, how odd it is to be in the middle of a massive black chamber, you know, 10,000 meters away from any other human life, in a place that no eyes have ever witnessed before, that very little life has ever seen. And I feel very plugged in to a raw form of nature that is hard to get in other ways. And I think it's a combined adrenaline rush, but also just a very poetic kind of connection to our human history. I think when pursuing things that nobody's done before, that's maybe the hardest part, because you know, there's nothing really to compare to. So as you've done something a couple times, then it requires less bravery. You know, in the end of the day, I heard, I think it was in a movie and probably even in literature before, that you have to do the scary thing and then you get the confidence afterwards. So it seems unfair, but it somehow is that way. So the biggest component from a fear perspective is you have to just do something that you or nobody's done before, and then once you've done it, it's not so scary anymore, and building upon that becomes less scary. But you know, I have some advantages. I'm not scared of the water at all, so I feel very at home in the water. I'm fortunately not claustrophobic, so you know, in general, I don't feel fearful of small places. And so I think those are big advantages from that perspective. So brave, I don't know. I don't know that I am comfortable making that determination particularly, but I think you have to be willing to challenge yourself. And so I've always, for whatever odd set of psychological reasons, liked to challenge myself in a wide area of aspects of my life. That's a funny question. I think, I mean, funny that I can't think of any quickly, because I really, you know, I've been a pretty avid reader since a young age, and in the accumulation of a literature degree, also read a lot. And I would have to say that I can't think of anything that would be good to say from a exploration point of view, except that for me, literature is, in a way, a very dynamic form of exploration. So, everything from a writer who tries a new type of style, or who explores different aspects of psychology, or who writes about faraway, places or imaginary places. So I've been through different periods in my life where I liked anything from, psychological books to chaos theory books, to scientific inquiry books, to science fiction. So I think each of those is a form of discovery, and each of those played to components in my psychology that fueled the idea that if you can dream about it, it can be done. And if it can be done, then there's a good chance you can do it if you're really motivated. So for me, most things in life are ultimately about what you're willing to put into them. So I think that you can do almost anything in the world, but you have to be willing to pay the penalty. And sometimes that's your entire life, for example, as an investment. And of course, it also means that you have to be willing to risk your life in some situations to accomplish that. And if you are willing to risk your life, or willing to invest your entire life, or if you're willing to give up essentially everything else in order to accomplish this goal, that person's motivation is unconquerable. I think I would, and that's nice to say. I think about it, I think like most people, and I think about it a lot at different periods in my life. And so I think about the kinds of choices that ended up putting me in Gainesville, Florida, this sort of, very strange place in some ways. It's a college town, and so that's what brought me there, like many people. And I probably have only stayed because I travel so much. Not because it's not a good place, but it's a small town, and it's not very international, and the exposure to international people and ideas is quite limited. But what it brought me was a direct and easy access to cave diving and to exploration, which fueled that aspect to my life. And so I may have missed out on a lot of the diving exploration that I had done. I think it would have still been fine, to be honest, because I would have found another way to explore. At least I hope. I like to believe that. But so far I would have done everything the same, or at least pretty similar. I think the onus of decision comes where to go next. And so that keeps me awake a lot more than whether I've done well up to now, because I feel that an urge to accomplish the next challenges, and so trying to figure out where to go and what I want to set my sights on is perhaps a little more disquieting. Well, that's probably one of my more romantic parts of my personality, which is that I think that we all have an obligation to our society to try to make it better than it was when we arrived, and that's probably what I meant also when I said, what's the next phase of my life going to hold? Because there are a lot of things that I would ultimately like to do in life. And a lot of things I'd like to accomplish. But the biggest in general, I think, is really to leave the world a better place. And that's not really so easy. And I think that as an explorer, that is just another expression of what I would like to do. So going and exploring something just for the merit of its exploration is pretty exciting and pretty intriguing, I have to admit. So I won't lie when I say that just being there and just seeing it, it's a lot, and some days it's probably even enough. But as a long-term life strategy, it's not sufficient, meaning that I can't just do that and still feel whole as a human being. I feel a strong and abiding responsibility to bring more to my world than that. And so, I try to bring that sense of excitement to some people. I try to share my sense of excitement. I try to let people understand how magical those kind of environments are and can be. I try to do some of that in my teaching as well, to let people appreciate that you don't have to be somewhere that nobody's been to do a form of exploration, because even going a few hundred meters into a cave is really a form of exploration that a small fraction of the population is doing, even if you only go right in the beginning. And then, more broadly, I try to conserve, or try to help be a voice for the conservation of those resources, both because I think it's somehow right, and because I think that we should try to do everything we can to allow future generations to also have these kinds of experiences and to appreciate that raw nature that I told you about. It's sad for me to imagine that in 100 or less years, many of the things that exist here that are real nature won't exist. And that spurs me to try to make a difference in that arena. I sure hope so. So I choose to believe there's hope. When faced with the alternative, I find it unappetizing. And so I've just decided that, really I think we can create our own reality in a number of ways. And I've seen that in a lot of areas in my life, to believe that ultimately it's really just a matter of making that choice. And like you, I think it's right now where, the natural world is on the mat and the referee has counted 2 out of 3, and we don't have a lot of luxury, and it's unfortunate because usually you don't really appreciate things until they're gone. And I think that probably people are going to have to lose a reasonable amount of the natural world before they really appreciate it, and that's really sad. It's also really hard to get those things back once they're gone. Having said that, the earth and nature at large, they're really resilient. And you can look to the human body, actually, even in that sense as well. I mean, people have done some pretty radically crazy things to their body over the years. And you can look at, anywhere from drug addictions where people are addled by drugs for decades, and then somehow manage to recover and live pretty healthy lives if they really set their mind to it. The body can recover. People smoke for, again, decades and then stop, and the body begins repairing. And I think it's quite interesting even just to think about what we do to our bodies intentionally, so to speak, and how well they manage it. So, just looking at the typical American diet, which is becoming, unfortunately, much more globally popular, really we're trying to kill ourselves, and the human body is doing everything it can to resist our best efforts. And the earth is a little bit like this. We're doing everything we can to squeeze the last bit of life out of the planet with more or less almost no care or consideration. And there's a lot of complex reasons for that, which maybe I think in the end we just want to focus on trying to educate people, and hopefully they will begin to see, and hopefully we can begin moving in a correct direction. This is the reason ultimately to try to begin somewhere with Project Baseline, which is our conservation effort, to document that environment, so that document environments around the world, so we can hopefully start to show people the present decline. And people will start to see it's really very measurable. And of course, if we could have started 50 years ago, it would be breathtaking to see that amount of change. But I think we have an amazing spirit. The human spirit is really remarkable, and its capacity for good and evil are fantastic. So I choose to believe that eventually we'll become a force for good.
So you're an optimist?
Yes, at heart, I suppose.